And welcome to material for Chapter 11, Social Psych. Social Psychology is one of my favorite chapters, so it's going to be really hard to stay under 15 minutes, but I'm going to give it my best shot. But first you'll find your learning outcomes, and then a definition of Social Psych. An important thing with Social Psych is we are going to categorize this information into two broad topics. So we're going to spend a while in social cognition, and we'll eventually move into social influence. So these are two big constructs within social psych, and we're going to talk about each one. To start us out with social cognition, we have a definition. So with the cognition, we're thinking about mental processes, about our thought processes. These help us make sense out of our social environment. So your first impressions of people, this is something that's very important for social psych. So we're trying to navigate the social world around us. So you'd see somebody like this. What might your first impressions be of this person? I see somebody that looks like they tried to dress up, tried to have a good day, and then something has happened since that point, and they are extremely upset. You can think about this person and this person. You can look at these individuals, and you'll get first impressions about them very easily. You'll interpret something about them or come to some conclusion quite quickly. This process, though, of perceiving other people is a complicated process, so we do it so quickly. But it's really a complicated thing. It involves the characteristics of the person. So what does this person look like? What do they seem like they're wearing? What's their emotion that we can read on their face? It also has a lot to do with our own self-perception and our goals. So if you're in a situation where you're on the subway, if your self-perception is that you're a giant, scary-looking man, you might not sit next to an old lady. You might say, you know, I think I'm just going to sit next to that guy over there instead of sitting next to her, because I might freak her out. Or your goals might be to be left alone, so you might sit next to somebody who's wearing earphones. It's also important, this process also takes place within a specific context. So you have to see the norms for that context. It may be totally normal to be dancing in a club, but not so much on the subway when everyone else is sitting down. So you're going to look at the behavior that that person is exhibiting and determine if it's appropriate for the context. A really, really fun part of social psychology to me is to think about and realize how many social norms we follow in a day. So these are the rules of acceptable behavior we have in our society. They're not things that are legal versus illegal or anything like that. It's just more stuff we don't really do. And a lot of times we don't question why we don't do these things. There's a lot of really interesting social norms, though. Things like sitting here, really spread out like that. This isn't something that's wrong. We're not seeing anything of this person, but it's just something we don't do. We don't sit spread out like that. When you go to the bathroom or to the movie theater, you often leave a space in between people. You don't, get right next to somebody when you're the only two people in there. And when you board an elevator, most people will get on and face the doors. You don't see a lot of people doing this maneuver here facing the inside of the elevator. So these are really fun social norms to try to break at times. The elevator one's always a really good one. This is showing a social norm. So he's breaking the social norm by saying goodbye, everybody, while he's in the subway. If you've ever ridden a subway, you know we don't really do that to people, but he's new in town. These categories that we have for our social categorization, some of these things are explicit categories, so some things are going to be deliberate and conscious. So you might look at somebody and try to understand who they are in a very deliberate fashion. For many things, though, we're going to rely on our implicit cognition. So these are things that come up automatically, they're not conscious. So implicit personality theories, we have a lot of these, but these are our assumptions among people, traits, and behaviors. So if we look at this woman here, we might assume that her traits are kindness, generosity, her behaviors are baking cookies, but she could be a bank robber. She could be a malicious criminal. We don't know. We're just making assumptions. We also make assumptions based on appearance. So someone who's attractive, we perceive them to be good, capable, intelligent, kind, but they could be a giant jerk. There's no guarantee that they're kind. We make attributions about people's behavior all the time. So if you drive somewhere, someone cuts you off in traffic, you're going to make an attribution about why did this happen. So you're going to say, most of us would be tempted to say it's something about that person. So they cut me off because they're a jerk. And when you do that, you're making an internal attribution. It's something about them. If you instead say maybe they're late for something, maybe they have to pick their kid up from childcare, maybe they have a doctor's appointment, you're making an external attribution. It's something about that person's situation. The fundamental attribution error is one of our cognitive errors. We make a lot of cognitive errors. But this error specifically says that we blame our own behavior for external causes. So I'm late because my alarm clock didn't go off or because I was cut off in traffic. But we say other people's behavior has to do with their personality. So you're late because you're lazy, or you're late because you don't care about this appointment. So we're really tempted to do that a lot, to say, give ourselves grace, but not give other people the same grace. And we see that here with Lucy in this comic. Another cognitive bias we have is to blame the victim. So we want to say if something bad happens to you, you've done something to deserve that. That goes back to our just world hypothesis. So we have this idea that life is fair, so people deserve what comes to them. It makes us feel better to think that good things happen to good people and bad things to bad people, but we know that's not always accurate. The hindsight bias is another one of our biases, and with this we think that we knew something all along. So, something will happen and we'll say, oh, I should have, I could have known that. I knew that was going to happen. But most of the time we don't truly know it's going to happen. So if you watch the Super Bowl, you might say, oh, yeah, I think Team X will win. But then Team Y wins. It's a totally different team. And when you'll look back, most people will say, yeah, I thought Team Y was going to win. They were really on a winning streak this year. So we think we could predict it. South Park makes fun of this idea with this character, Captain Hindsight. So he, kind of says, if you didn't want this to happen, you shouldn't have done X, Y, Z. So, this idea that you should have been able to tell something was going to happen before it did. Another one of our cognitive biases is our self-serving bias. So with this, we take the credit for the good things that happen, and we blame external things for negative events. We can see the opposite of that with the self-effacing bias. So with this bias, we internalize our failures and externalize our successes. We do see cultural differences in these biases. So people, from the United States or from individualistic cultures are often self-serving, whereas people from collectivist cultures are often self-effacing. So they say it's my fault when their company fails, but when it does well, they say I have the best people in the world. So that's what we often see from a collectivist culture, is the self-effacing or modesty bias. This chart goes through each of these biases and gives a little bit more description. So that'll bring us into attitudes. For attitudes, we don't mean that somebody has a good or a bad attitude. What we instead mean is more of your attitude towards corporal punishment or your attitude towards global warming. So kind of this tendency you have to evaluate objects in a certain way. We have three components to these attitudes: your emotional component, cognitive, and your behavioral component. This example kind of walks through someone's attitude and those components. Social psychologists are really interested in knowing when our attitudes will match our behavior. And we know that this kind of occurs more when attitudes are extreme, formed by experience, and when people are knowledgeable with a vested interest. So if you want to see if people will recycle, if they say they have a pro-recycling attitude, you want to see if they'll actually do that behavior, you can see if their attitudes match these criteria. An important thing that's kind of difficult to understand, I would definitely encourage you to review cognitive dissonance. But with cognitive dissonance, it's this tension that we feel from having two inconsistent thoughts that don't line up. We try to rationalize these thoughts. If we can do it, we feel a little bit better. But if we can't rationalize these thoughts, we might change our attitude. So if you go to a restaurant while dieting, you plan to order the salad, but you actually order the giant cheeseburger, you're going to have two inconsistent thoughts. So I need to lose weight. I ate a giant burger. So this can lead to some tension. So you're going to try to rationalize that. I needed the protein. I've been working so hard on my diet. If you can rationalize it, you'll feel better. If you can't rationalize it, then we often change our attitude. Fitness isn't really that important to me. I really don't need to go on a diet at all. So you would have an attitude change. The book will go over this example about eating grasshoppers. You can read that in the book. Post-decision dissonance is another kind of way in which we feel better about things that we've done or kind of reduce tension. So we're likely to emphasize the negative features of a choice we reject. So if you choose not to buy a certain car, you're likely to think back about all the bad things about that car. And then you're going to emphasize the positive features of the car you did buy. So man, I'm really glad I bought that car. It had all these great features. And why would we do that? Well, it helps us to feel better about the choice we did make. Prejudice is a really important topic. So prejudice is an attitude. It's a negative attitude towards people in a specific social group. These stereotypes are what can lead to prejudice. We have a definition of a stereotype here, but stereotypes are really, really problematic at times. Sometimes they can be good. They help us to navigate a lot of social information very quickly, but they can also be really hard to shake, and they can lead to things like stereotype threat, where you know a stereotype exists about your group, and knowing that it exists makes you actually perform worse on tasks that tap into that stereotype. We all have groups that we belong to. We call those our in-groups. Groups in which we do not belong, those are our out-groups. And there's some biases that can occur with group membership. So we're likely to view people in our out-group as being all the same, assuming they have the same characteristics. So Family Guy did this with Peter Griffin. He goes into Chinatown, and every man he sees in there, he says, "Hey, Jackie Chan. Hey, Jackie Chan. Ooh, it's Jackie Chan." So he is assuming that all people are the same. He's not seeing the differences there. We can also have biases with our in-group. So with ethnocentrism, we often believe that our group does things the right way, other groups do things the wrong way. Implicit attitudes are something really important to social psychologists. So for the most part, you're not going to hear people espouse overt prejudice. Instead, what you might find are more implicit attitudes, automatic, unintentional types of attitudes. And you can test these through things like the implicit association test. So I have a link there describing that test. It's a really fun exercise to try. Robbers Cave is an experiment that Sharif kind of did with these boys at camp. He assigned the boys to one of two groups, and he found that this assigning bred a lot of conflict. He tried to get the boys to hang out with one another and thought that this would help reduce conflict, and it didn't. What really helped reduce the conflict, or what finally helped, was having groups cooperate with each other to achieve a specific goal. This work has been brought into the classroom with the Jigsaw classroom. So in this case, we have people cooperating with each other. Each student has a unique contribution to make, and this also helps to reduce prejudice in a classroom setting. I would encourage you to watch this Class Divided if you get a chance. It's kind of long, but it just really shows how easy it is to form an in and out group, and then what this can do for people when they do form an in and out group. That's going to pull us into social psychology, or the second part of social psychology, which is on social influence. The first topic with social influence is conformity. So we have a definition here of conformity. Some of the earliest work in conformity was done by Ash. So he would have one participant come into a group setting, and the members there were all Confederates, which means they were part of the study. And these Confederates would give the wrong answer when asked to match the standard line to a comparison line. And what Ash found was that many participants would conform, and they would give the wrong answer, even though it was obviously wrong. There's a lot of factors that promote conformity, but something, if you're trying not to conform, generally if you have an ally, somebody who will not conform with you, that can be very helpful to stop conformity. Obedience is another important issue, and this is when you perform some type of behavior due to a direct command from an authority figure. Milgram's obedience experiment was one of the most famous in this area. So with this, he had a teacher who was a participant and a learner who was a Confederate, so again, part of the study. The teacher would shock the learner for the wrong answers. It wasn't real shock, but he would shock them for wrong answers, and these shocks kept escalating in intensity. Milgram was really curious if teachers would continue to obey by administering shock to the learner, even if it became evident they were hurting the learner. So these are the learner's schedule of protests here in Milgram's experiment. So you can see the learner, start complaining more and more heavily. These weren't real shocks again, but still they were complaining heavily. Most people thought that the participants would stop shocking the person once they got to a certain point where the learner was screaming and in intense pain. But they found that most people actually shocked up to the full level, and these results have been replicated many times. So it was a very scary thing. There's been some variations on this study you can review, but really that authority figure giving the commands seems to be very, very important for actually making people follow through. The Stanford Prison Study was a really important study to social psych. So with this, they had college students. Some were identified as prisoners, some as guards, and this was just random assignment. But they really found that people would conform very heavily to those roles to the point that the experiment got very intense and had to be discontinued. So this showed us that maybe some people are not bad apples, but they're put into bad barrels, a bad situation. The final topic is on the bystander effect. So with the Kitty Genovese, this was a case, she was killed in New York City. Many people saw it, but no one called for help. And this was really interesting to social psychology researchers who wanted to know why. And what they found was the bystander effect. So the more people that see an incident, the less likely they are to help. And we think that's because responsibility is diffused in that situation, so people don't feel like they have to be the one to actually go out and help somebody in that case. But that's going to finish material for social psych. Bye.